They called her weak, broken, and pathetic. They thought she would just cry and accept her fate. But they forgot one crucial detail. A cornered woman with nothing left to lose is the most dangerous animal of all. This is a story that will chill you to the bone. The crisp autumn leaves crunched beneath my feet as I stood frozen behind my mother's kitchen window. My 11-year-old son, Leo, was squeezing my hand so hard it hurt. But nothing compared to the pain tearing at my chest as I listened to the two people I trusted most in this world destroy everything I thought I knew about love, loyalty, and family. She's so broken, Margaret. Always crying, always needy. I can't do it anymore. My husband David's voice filtered through the glass like a knife to my heart. My mother's laugh was sharp and cruel. I told you not to marry her, didn't I? I always said she was too weak for a man like you, too damaged. The words hit me like physical blows. My legs went weak. Leo looked at me with confused eyes, sensing something awful was happening, but not understanding what. I put a finger to my lips, telling him to be quiet, even as my entire world crumbled around us. The insurance money from her father's death was worth it for a while, David continued, his voice as casual as if he were discussing the weather. But it's almost gone now. I'm tired of playing the doting husband for someone so pathetic. I had to grab the window frame to keep from falling. The insurance money. The money I thought we were saving for Leo's college. The money that was supposed to secure our future. He had been using me all this time. What are you going to do about it? My mother asked. I could hear the excitement in her voice, as if she were enjoying this sick conversation. I'm going to leave her. Take it all. She's so weak and broken she won't even put up a fight. She'll just cry and accept it, like she always does. It was then that something inside me died. The part of me that still believed in goodness, in love, in family. But from those ashes, something else was born. Something cold and calculating. Something that would make sure David and my mother learned exactly what happens when you underestimate a woman who has nothing to lose. I pulled Leo away from the window and walked silently back to my car, my mind already plotting. They thought I was weak. They thought I was broken. They were about to find out just how wrong they were. 3 months earlier, I had been living what I thought was a perfect life. Well, as perfect as life could be for someone like me. My name is Sarah, and I have spent most of my 32 years believing I was not good enough for the good things that happened to me. The morning that would change everything started like any other Tuesday. I woke up in our cozy 3-bedroom house on Maplewood Lane. The same house David and I had bought when Leo was just 2 years old. The same house where I thought we would grow old together. David was already up, showered, and dressed in his blue work uniform. He ran a small construction company, and he was good at it. Everyone in the town of Clearwater Creek respected him. He was the kind of man other men wanted to be friends with, and women found attractive. I never quite understood what he saw in me. "Morning, beautiful," he said, kissing my forehead as I stumbled into the kitchen in my old bathrobe. "Coffee's ready." I smiled up at him, my heart fluttering just as it had since our first date 12 years ago. Even after all this time, even through all the difficult moments we had faced, I still felt lucky to be married to David. "Is Leo up yet?" I asked, pouring myself a cup of coffee and adding the cream David had left out for me. He always remembered those little things. Or so I thought. "Still sleeping. I'll get him up in a few minutes." David checked his watch. "I've got that big job starting today. The Martinez house renovation. I might be home late tonight." I nodded, used to his long hours. The construction business was unpredictable, especially in a small town like Clearwater Creek. We had learned to make the most of the time we had together. "Mom called yesterday," I said, stirring my coffee. "She wants us to come visit this weekend." "It's been a while." David's face changed for a second. Something flashed in his eyes, but it was gone so fast I thought I had imagined it. Sure, honey. Whatever you want. Looking back now, I should have paid more attention to that moment. I should have noticed how his voice sounded different when he agreed. I should have seen how his jaw tensed. But I was so busy being grateful that my husband and my mother got along that I missed all the warning signs. Leo burst into the kitchen then, his dark hair a mess in every direction. At 11, he was all arms and legs, growing so fast I could barely keep him in clothes that fit. Morning, Mom. Morning, Dad. He grabbed a piece of toast off the counter and took a huge bite. Slow down, kiddo, I laughed. Breakfast isn't going anywhere. David ruffled Leo's hair. Listen to your mother, son. She knows what she's talking about. The way he said it, so warm and loving, made my chest swell with emotion. This was my family. These two people were my whole world. Without them, I was nothing. Or so I thought. Then David left for work with his usual kiss and, "I love you," at the door. Leo caught the school bus just in time, and I settled into my usual routine of cleaning the house, doing laundry, and getting ready for my part-time job at the local library. I loved working at the library. It was quiet and peaceful, and I got to help people find books that might change their lives the same way books had changed mine. Reading had been my escape. Growing up in a house where my mother criticized everything I did, books showed me that there were other ways to live, other ways to be. My supervisor, Mrs. Davis, was shelving returns when I arrived. "Good morning, Sarah. You're looking well today." Mrs. Davis was one of the few people who made me feel valued. She was in her 60s with kind eyes and a gentle way of speaking that reminded me of the grandmother I never had. "Thanks, Mrs. Davis. How was your weekend?" "Lovely, dear. My grandson came to visit. He's about Leo's age. You know, you two should meet sometime." I smiled and nodded, but inside I felt that familiar knot of anxiety. Making plans with other families meant risking them seeing how broken I was. What if Leo was embarrassed by me? What if the other parents thought I wasn't good enough? The morning passed uneventfully. I helped a young mother find picture books for her toddler. I assisted an elderly man with his family tree research. And I organized the new fiction arrivals. Simple tasks, but they made me feel useful. I was rearranging the children's section when I heard Mrs. Davis talking to another librarian, Carol, at the main desk. "I saw David down at the coffee shop yesterday around lunchtime," Carol was saying. "He was with Margaret, and they looked pretty cozy if you ask me." My hands froze on the book I was holding. Margaret was my mother's name. Really? Mrs. Davis sounded surprised. I didn't know they knew each other that well. "Oh, they seem to know each other just fine," Carol said with that tone people use when they're hinting at something without saying it directly. My heart started to beat faster. There was probably an innocent explanation. Maybe David had run into my mother somewhere and they had decided to have lunch. Maybe they were planning a surprise for me. But a cold feeling settled in my stomach anyway. I tried to focus on my work for the rest of the day, but Carol's words kept echoing in my mind. They looked pretty cozy, if you ask me. When I picked Leo up from school, I almost asked him if he wanted to drive by the construction site to see his father. But something stopped me. A feeling I couldn't name. That night, David came home close to 10. He looked tired, his clothes dusty from work. "Sorry, honey. Long day." He kissed my cheek quickly and headed for the shower. "How's the Martinez job?" I called after him. But when I looked out the window, I noticed his truck was completely clean. No dust, no dirt, nothing to indicate he had been doing construction work all day. That night, as David slept beside me, I stared at the ceiling and tried to push away the thoughts that crept into my mind. David loved me. He had chosen me. We had a good life together. But doubt, once it takes root, is hard to kill. The next few weeks passed in a strange fog. On the surface, everything seemed normal. David went to work. Leo went to school. I went to the library. We had dinner together most nights. We watched television as a family on weekends. But underneath, something had changed. I found myself paying attention to things I had never noticed before. The way David sometimes seemed distracted during conversations. How he had started carrying his phone everywhere, even into the bathroom. The fact that he had changed his password and angled the screen away from me when he used it. Little things, things that could have innocent explanations. But they added up. I also started to notice things about my mother. How she always seemed to know details about David's work that I hadn't shared with her. How she would ask about him first whenever I called, before asking about Leo or me. "How is David doing with that big construction project?" she would ask. But I hadn't told her about any big construction project. When I mentioned it to David, he just shrugged. She probably heard it around town. You know how people talk in Clearwater Creek. That was true. Clearwater Creek was the kind of small town where everyone knew everyone else's business. But it still felt strange. Then came the day that changed everything. It was a Thursday in early November. Leo had a half day at school because of teacher conferences, and I had taken the afternoon off from the library to spend time with him. "Can we go visit Grandma Margaret?" Leo asked as we sat at the kitchen table sharing a grilled cheese sandwich. My mother had always insisted Leo call her Grandma Margaret instead of just Grandma. She said it sounded more sophisticated. I thought it sounded cold, but I never argued about it. "I don't know, honey. We should call first to make sure she's home." But when I tried calling my mother's home phone, it went straight to voicemail. Her mobile phone did the same. "Maybe she's out shopping," Leo suggested. "We could just drive by and see if her car is there." My mother lived about 20 minutes away in the house I had grown up in. A neat little place with a garden she was proud of and neighbors she had known for 30 years. "Okay," I agreed. "But if she's not home, we'll just come back another day." The drive to my mother's house was quiet. Leo chattered about school and his friends, and I half listened as I took in the autumn scenery. The leaves were at their peak, painting the world in shades of gold and crimson. But when we turned onto my mother's street, my blood ran cold. David's truck was parked in my mother's driveway. I pulled over to the other side of the street. My hands were shaking on the steering wheel. Leo looked up from his handheld console, confused. "Why are we stopping? Isn't that Dad's truck?" "Yes," I managed to say. "It is." My mind raced through possible explanations. Maybe David was helping my mother with something around the house. Maybe her sink was leaking or her roof needed repair. "Should we go in?" Leo asked. "In a minute," I said. "I just want to figure out what's going on first." Something deep in my gut screamed danger. Every instinct I had told me not to go to that door, not to knock, not to announce our presence. We walked silently to the back of the house. My mother's kitchen window looked out onto the backyard, and I knew from years of childhood experience that you could hear conversations inside quite clearly from that spot. What I heard destroyed my world. "She's so broken, Margaret. Always crying, always needy. I can't do it anymore." David's voice sounded tired, frustrated, as if he were talking about a burden he had carried for too long. "I told you not to marry her, didn't I?" My mother's voice was sharp with satisfaction. "I always said she was too weak for a man like you, too damaged." I gripped the window frame so hard my knuckles turned white. My 11-year-old son, Leo, squeezed my hand just as tightly, as if he understood what was happening. "The insurance money from her father's death was worth it for a while," David continued. But it's almost gone now. I'm tired of playing the doting husband for someone so pathetic. The world tilted. My father had died in a car accident 3 years ago, leaving me a significant life insurance payout. Money that David and I were supposedly saving for Leo's future. Money that was supposed to be our safety net. "What are you going to do about it?" my mother asked. And I could hear the excitement in her voice. "I'm going to leave her. Take it all. She's so weak and broken. She won't even put up a fight. She'll just cry and accept it, like she always does." They both laughed then. They laughed at my pain, at my weakness, at my trusting nature. "When?" my mother asked. "Soon. Maybe after the holidays. I don't want to ruin Leo's Christmas. The kid doesn't deserve that." "You're too soft," my mother said. "He's been a disappointment since the day he was born. Weak, just like his father. At least his father had the decency to die and leave her some money." It was then that something inside me snapped. It didn't break into pieces. It snapped like a rubber band stretched too far. My father had been a kind, gentle man who loved books and who taught me that I was worthy of love. My mother had spent my entire childhood comparing me unfavorably to other kids, telling me I wasn't smart enough or pretty enough or strong enough for anything good. I had believed her. I had spent my entire adult life being grateful that David had chosen me. Damaged, weak, and pathetic. But now I knew the truth. He hadn't chosen me. He had chosen my father's money. And my mother hadn't just been critical. She had been actively working to destroy my self-worth so that when this moment came, I would be too broken to fight back. I walked back to the car on shaky legs. Leo looked at me with worry. "Mom, are you okay? You're really pale." "I'm fine, honey," I said, my voice surprisingly steady. "Change of plans. We're going home. But what about Dad's truck? Shouldn't we say hi? Dad's busy helping Grandma Margaret with something. We'll see him at home." As I drove away from my mother's house with Leo chattering away in the back seat, my mind was already working, planning, calculating. They thought I was weak. They thought I would just cry and accept what they did to me. They were about to find out how wrong they were. That night, I did something I hadn't done in years. I really looked at myself in the bathroom mirror. The woman looking back was 32, but she looked older, tired. Her brown hair was pulled back in the same simple ponytail she had worn for the last decade. No makeup, because David always said he liked me natural. Practical, unassuming clothes, because anything else seemed to be asking for attention I didn't deserve. She looked exactly like what she was. A woman who had spent her entire adult life trying to be small, quiet, and grateful for the scraps of love people threw her way. But behind my plain brown eyes, something new was burning. Something that had been dormant for too long. David came home around 11, just as he said he would. He kissed my cheek. He asked about my day. He talked to me about his busy schedule for tomorrow. The perfect husband act. That night after David fell asleep, I got up and went to our home office. We kept all our financial records in a filing cabinet there. Records that David handled entirely because I was too emotional to deal with money matters. What I found was worse than I had imagined. My father's insurance money. $150,000 that was supposed to be for Leo's college fund was almost all gone. $50,000 had been transferred to an account I didn't recognize. Another $30,000 had been withdrawn in cash over the last 6 months. The rest had been spent on things that made no sense. $20,000 for home improvements that were never done. $15,000 for business equipment for David's construction company. Thousands more for expenses I couldn't identify. I sat in that office until dawn, going through every paper, every statement, every receipt, building a picture of how completely I had been betrayed. When the sun came up, I knew 3 things for certain. First, David had been systematically stealing from me for months, probably planning his exit strategy. Second, my mother had been in on it from the beginning. Phone records showed dozens of calls between them, often during times when David had told me he was working. And third, they had severely underestimated me. The next morning, I did something I hadn't done in a long time. I called in sick to work, not because I was actually sick, but because I had things to do. Important things. After David left for work and Leo left for school, I drove to the bank. Our bank, where I had been a customer for 12 years, where the tellers knew me by name. "Good morning, Mrs. Jackson," said Carol, the head teller. "How can I help you today?" "I need to talk to someone about my accounts," I said. "All of them." What I learned at that meeting changed everything. They had opened it 3 months ago. "This is definitely your signature on the authorization to move funds," the bank manager, Mr. Peterson, explained. "But if you don't remember signing this." "Oh, I remember it now," I lied smoothly. Mr. Peterson looked relieved. But I wasn't going to make this a bank problem. I was going to handle this myself. But more importantly, I learned about a different kind of law, the kind that deals with fraud, embezzlement, and theft. Taking money from accounts without permission, even between spouses, was still theft if you could prove the money had been obtained under false pretenses. And I could prove that. When I picked Leo up from school, I had the beginnings of a plan. But I had to be smart about it. "How was school today?" I asked Leo as we drove home. "Did you know sometimes the colonists would pretend to be loyal to the British while they were actually planning to fight them?" Out of the mouths of babes. I smiled and laughed at his jokes and asked him about his day with what seemed like genuine interest. "I am happy," I said. For the first time in months, I had a purpose, a plan, a reason to get up in the morning. "I was thinking," I continued. "It's been a while since we've all spent time together." Something flashed in David's eyes. "I'm sure Margaret would love that." Margaret. Margaret. As if they were close. As if they knew each other well, which of course they did. "Yes. I'll call her tomorrow." That night, as David slept beside me, I stared at the ceiling and planned the next phase of my revenge. Phase 1 was information gathering, and that was almost complete. But Phase 3, that would be the most important part. That would be making sure they both understood exactly what they had lost when they decided to underestimate Sarah Jackson. In the darkness, I smiled for the first time in weeks. The call to my mother the next morning was a masterpiece of acting. "I was wondering if you'd like to come over for dinner Saturday night." Poor, pathetic Sarah, reaching out for the comfort of a family she didn't deserve. "I'm fine," I said, injecting just the right amount of fake cheerfulness into my voice. "Maybe a little tired." "Men work hard to provide for their families, dear. You should be grateful, not complaining." The casual cruelty in her tone was so familiar, I almost missed it. "Of course. I'll see you Saturday around 6, then." "Perfect. Should I bring anything?" I had been playing that role for so long, I had forgotten it was an act. But now that I was consciously acting, I could see exactly how I had been manipulated. Every criticism disguised as helpful advice. Every time they had made me feel like I was lucky to be tolerated. The rage that filled me then was clean, cold, and purposeful. My next stop was an office supply store where I bought a small digital voice recorder, the kind college students use to record lectures. If David and my mother wanted to have secret conversations, I would make sure I had proof of every word. That afternoon, I did something else I hadn't done in years. I went shopping for myself. Not for practical clothes that would help me blend in. I even bought a pair of heels that made me feel taller and more confident. The woman in the fitting room mirror looked like a stranger, like someone who might actually deserve good things in life. When I got home, I hid my purchases in the back of my closet and went back to being the old Sarah. I spent the day cleaning the house and preparing dinner, just as I had done hundreds of times before. The wireless camera I set in the living room, disguised as a decorative piece on the mantelpiece. The digital recorder I put in my pocket, already turned on. "You look nice," he said when he saw me in the kitchen checking on the roast. I was wearing one of my old outfits, simple pants and a plain sweater. Nothing that would indicate any change in my personality or circumstances. My mother arrived at exactly 6, carrying a bottle of wine and wearing the kind of outfit that cost more than I usually spent on clothes in a year. The first shot, delivered with surgical precision. A criticism disguised as concern. Designed to make me feel self-conscious and inadequate. The way she looked at my husband sent a shiver down my spine. There was something possessive in her gaze, something that suggested ownership. But I smiled and thanked her for the wine and served dinner as if nothing was wrong. The conversation over dinner was torture. "Oh, David," my mother said at one point. David hadn't mentioned any permit issue to me. But he responded easily, as if it were a topic they had discussed before. "Thanks for asking. Just work stuff, honey. Nothing to worry about." While I was gone, I could hear them talking in low voices in the dining room. I couldn't make out the words, but the tone was intimate, familiar. "This looks delicious, dear," David said, but his smile seemed forced. The rest of the night passed in a blur of small talk and fake smiles. My mother left around 9 with another hug and kiss that felt like acid on my skin. "Thanks for a lovely evening, darling." After she left, David helped me with the dishes. "Your mother seemed to enjoy herself," he said. "She did. I'm glad you two get along so well. She's a good woman." That night, I lay in bed listening to David sleep and planning the next phase of my revenge. I now had evidence, recorded conversations that would make it clear they were having secret discussions about things they were hiding from me, video recordings of their body language and interactions. But I needed more. I needed proof of the financial theft. I needed documentation of their affair, because I was sure now that was what it was. Most importantly, I needed them to fully incriminate themselves. And I knew exactly how to make that happen. The following Wednesday, David announced he would be working late again. "Big deadline at the Martinez job," he said, kissing my forehead at breakfast. No sign of construction activity. That night, after Leo was in bed, I did something that would have seemed impossible just a month ago. I got in my car and drove to the construction yard where David stored his equipment. From there, I drove to my mother's house. David's truck was in her driveway. I had my digital recorder in one pocket and my phone in the other, ready to take pictures if I needed to. The conversation I overheard that night was the final nail in their coffin. "After Christmas. I promised Leo I'd give him a good Christmas. You're too soft. Both of them will." Then David's voice again, lower. "Sometimes I think about what our lives could have been like if I had just chosen you from the start instead of settling for her." My mother's laugh was low and pleased. "Once you're free of her, we can finally be together, like we were always meant to be." They had been in love all along. My husband and my mother. Most of it is already transferred to our account. She's so trusting she'll sign anything I put in front of her. The house will take more work, but I've been forging her signature on the refinancing documents. "What about Leo?" my mother asked. "I'll get custody." David's laugh was cold. "She will by the time my lawyer finishes building the case." The way David had been encouraging me to see a therapist for my anxiety. The way he had been documenting my emotional outbursts, moments where I had cried or gotten frustrated like any normal person. When I snuck away from that house, I had enough evidence to bury them both. "I believe my husband has been forging my signature on financial documents," I said. I need to document this, but I don't want him to know I'm investigating yet. Susan was professional and understanding. When can you come in? I had recorded conversations that proved their affair and their plans to destroy me. But I wasn't ready to play my cards yet. I wanted them to dig their hole even deeper. Leo has never seen the ocean. I talked to my father's insurance company today, and they said there might be some additional benefits I didn't know about. Something about compounding interest on delayed payments. The lie came out of my mouth so smoothly I was surprised, but the effect on David was immediate and satisfying. He nearly choked on his wine. David's face went through a series of expressions. Surprise, greed, calculation, and finally, something that looked like panic. That's wonderful, honey. Truly wonderful. If more insurance money was coming, he would want to get his hands on it before he left me. Which meant he would have to delay his plan. Which meant I had more time to prepare my final blow. That night, after David fell asleep, I heard him get up around 2 in the morning. Margaret? Yeah, it's me. We've got a problem. She's too stupid to realize. We might have to wait it out longer than we planned. I know, but if we move too fast and we miss out on that money. His voice trailed off as he moved deeper into the kitchen. But I had heard enough. They were going to delay their plan to destroy me until they could steal even more money that didn't exist. The next 2 weeks were the hardest of my life. The difficult part was pretending to be the same weak, grateful woman they expected while I was preparing to destroy them both. I asked about his day with what seemed like genuine interest. And I made sure Leo never suspected anything was wrong. But underneath, I was a woman transformed. I built a case so airtight that no judge in the world would ever let David walk away with my money or my son. The private investigator, a former police detective named Michael Scott, was particularly helpful. In 30 years of doing this job, he told me during one of our meetings, I've never seen such thorough documentation. Your husband isn't just cheating and stealing. If the DA wants to take it to the extreme, he could be looking at 5 to 10 years in prison. The thought should have made me feel guilty. But all I felt was a cold satisfaction. Not yet, Mom, but I'm hoping soon. Well, you know what they say, good things come to those who wait. If only she knew how true that was going to be. The moment I had been waiting for arrived on a Thursday afternoon in early December. David announced he would be working late again, but this time he made a mistake. The Martinez job is running behind, he said. It was completely finished. That night, I followed him again. But instead of going to my mother's house, he drove to a motel on the outskirts of town, the kind of place people went when they didn't want to be seen. My mother's car was already in the parking lot. Through the window of the room, I could see 2 figures moving. The private investigator had given me a camera with a telephoto lens, and I used it to document everything. David's truck in the motel parking lot. David had his arm around my mother's waist. She was laughing at something he had said, looking up at him with obvious affection. Then I drove home and uploaded it to the encrypted folder the private investigator had set up for me. When David came home at midnight, I was waiting with a cup of tea and a concerned expression. That's good. I worry about you working so hard. If only he knew. The next morning, I made the call I had been preparing for weeks. I'm ready to file. Are you sure? I want to file today, and I want the account freeze to go into effect immediately. I'll be there. Martinez job, the man sounded confused. That job finished 2 weeks ago, in mid-November. Oh, I'm sorry. I must have misunderstood. My husband, David Jackson, said he was working there this week. David Jackson? We don't have any jobs going on this week. The last piece of the puzzle fell into place. David didn't just work for a construction company, he owned a small one. But business had been slow, and instead of telling me the truth, he had been pretending to have a steady job while he stole money from me and planned his escape. At 2 p.m., I sat in Jessica Miller's office and signed the papers that would destroy my husband's life. The account freeze will go into effect at the close of business today, she explained. He won't be able to access any of the joint accounts or the money he transferred into his account with your mother. And the house? Since you can prove he forged your signature on the refinancing documents, those transactions are null and void. The house remains in your name. And Leo's custody? Jessica gave me a wry smile. Given the evidence of financial fraud and psychological manipulation you've documented, I'd say there's virtually no chance he gets custody. What happens next? He'll be served with the papers tomorrow morning. Take Leo and go somewhere safe until we see how he reacts. And the criminal charges? That's up to you. The evidence is strong enough that the DA would definitely prosecute if you want to press charges. About my mother's casual cruelty and her glee at my pain. About the years of manipulation and lies. All of them. I cooked dinner. And I acted as if everything was normal. David was distracted, probably worrying about the insurance money that would never come. I love our life, I said, snuggling up to his side. I woke up before dawn on Friday morning with a sense of anticipation I hadn't felt since I was a kid. Today was the day everything would change. At 8:30, I drove Leo to school and gave him an extra long hug. I love you, too, Mom. Are you okay? I'm fine, honey. Everything's going to be okay. Mrs. Jackson, this is Officer Williams with the Clearwater Creek Police Department. Is everything okay, officer? Well, ma'am, your husband was just served some legal papers this morning, and he's quite upset. He's saying you've been acting erratically lately, that you've been lying about insurance money and trying to manipulate him. Even now, even as his world was falling apart around him, David was trying to play the concerned husband card. Officer Williams, I think you should know that those papers are divorce documents I filed because I discovered my husband has been stealing from our joint accounts and having an affair with my mother. Your mother? Yes. Ma'am, would you be willing to come down to the station to give a statement? Of course. The police station was a 10-minute drive from the coffee shop. When I walked in, I could hear David's voice echoing from somewhere in the back of the building. Officer Williams met me at the front desk. He was a middle-aged man with kind eyes and a professional demeanor. Mrs. Jackson, I'm Officer Williams. Officer Williams's expression grew more serious with every piece of evidence I presented. Mrs. Jackson, this is extensive. I wanted to make sure I had everything I needed to protect myself and my son. What you've shown me here, this constitutes criminal fraud, possibly embezzlement. Yes, I am. She's clearly involved in this as well. I want charges pressed against her, too. We'll need to interview them both separately. I thought about Leo, who would be getting out of school in a few hours. About the house that was legally mine, but which might not feel safe anymore. Officer Williams handed me his card. Call me if you need anything. And Mrs. Jackson. What you did here, documenting everything so thoroughly. That took real courage. I found him at lunch and asked his teacher if I could speak to him privately. Dad is going through some difficult things right now, and we're probably going to have to stay somewhere else for a few days while the adults sort things out. Is it because of Grandma Margaret? I almost fell off the cafeteria bench. I heard them talking on the phone sometimes when Dad thought I was sleeping. My 11-year-old son had figured out what I had been too blind to see for months. It was the hardest question I had ever been asked. A month ago, the answer would have been an automatic yes. But it turns out he wasn't who I thought he was. We're going to be better than okay, honey. I promise you. That afternoon, we checked into a hotel across town. Nothing fancy, just a clean, safe place where Leo and I could figure out our next steps. My phone had been ringing with calls and texts all day. Some from David, ranging from angry to pleading to threatening. "We've arrested your husband and your mother. They're being charged with fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy to commit financial crimes. They'll probably be released on bail tomorrow, but they'll have restraining orders against them. The DA is confident we'll be able to recover most of it. The account they transferred it to has been frozen, and we're working on tracking the cash withdrawals." After I hung up, I sat on the hotel bed and tried to process everything that had happened. Living in a house I thought was safe. Tonight, I was divorced. My husband and my mother were in jail. But for the first time in years, I felt free. Leo looked up from his cartoons. They're happy tears. Sometimes adults cry when they're happy. Are we free now? I looked at my son. We're free. I had gone back to working full-time at the library, and Mrs. Davis had been incredibly supportive through everything. The whole town had heard about the scandal, of course. In a place like Clearwater Creek, news like that spreads faster than a wildfire. But instead of the judgment and pity I expected, most people were surprisingly supportive. Other women came forward with their own stories of David's inappropriate behavior over the years. Men in the construction industry revealed that David's business had been failing for months before he started stealing from me. Even more surprisingly, several people mentioned that they had never liked my mother, that they had always thought there was something cold about her. She always acted like she was better than everyone else, Mrs. Davis told me one afternoon. My mother received 18 months for conspiracy and her role in the plan. David looked at me with a mixture of anger and what might have been regret. My mother looked at me as if I were a stranger she had never seen before. Neither of them ever apologized. We recovered almost all of the stolen money, plus damages. But the money wasn't the real victory. The real victory was in who I had become in the process of fighting for it. The day after the sentencing, I did something I had never done before. I went to a hair salon and asked for a complete makeover. When she was finished, the woman looking back at me from the mirror was confident, strong, and beautiful. Not because she was trying to please anyone else, but because she finally knew her own worth. That night, Leo and I went out to dinner to celebrate. "Mom, you look different," Leo said as he ate his cheeseburger. "Different how?" "Happier. Like you're not afraid of anything anymore." "I'm not afraid," I realized as I said it. For the first time in my life, I'm not afraid. It was a difficult question, but I answered honestly. "I'm sad that your father made the choices he did, but I'm glad we got away from him before those choices hurt us even more. Are you going to get married again someday?" I laughed. "I don't know, honey. Maybe. But if I do, it will be to someone who thinks I'm amazing just the way I am." "You are amazing, Mom. You're the strongest person I know." Coming from my 11-year-old son, those words meant more than any compliment I had ever received. 7 months after the trial, I received a letter in the mail. The return address was the women's correctional facility where my mother was serving her sentence. Not just about the money, but about everything. "I was wrong about you. You were never weak or pathetic or any of the other things I said. And I took advantage of that trust. And I should have seen that from the beginning instead of encouraging him to hurt you. I thought I deserved better than the life I had. And I convinced myself that taking what you had would make me happy. It didn't. It just made me a person I don't recognize. I don't expect you to forgive me. You're stronger than I ever gave you credit for. Stronger than I ever was. I'm sorry, Sarah, for everything. Not because I was ready to forgive her. But because it was proof that sometimes even the worst people can recognize the truth when they're forced to face it." Leo is 16 now, tall and confident, and on the honor roll. He has never asked to visit his father in prison, and I have never pressed the issue. He moved to another state and has never tried to contact us. I've heard through mutual friends that he's working in construction again, living a small life he built from the ruins of the one he destroyed. My mother was released after 14 months. She moved to live with her sister, and we haven't spoken since she left. I run the library with confidence and authority. I own my own home. I've traveled to places I never thought I would see, Paris, London, Rome. Always with the knowledge that I can take care of myself wherever I go. Most importantly, I've raised a son who respects women and who understands that true strength isn't about taking advantage of others, but about integrity and kindness. Leo is off to college next year, with the money my father left for him, safe and sound. For the first time in my life, I'm excited to be on my own. I am a woman who stood up for herself when the world tried to break her. I am a woman who learned that the best revenge is not just surviving, but building a life so beautiful and full of light that the shadows of the past can no longer reach you. Sometimes late at night, I think about that moment behind my mother's kitchen window. It was also the moment I started to become the woman I was always meant to be. Instead, they set me free. And that is a gift I will be grateful for the rest of my life. Sarah's story is a powerful reminder that even in our darkest moments, we can find the strength to rewrite our own ending. Join our community, and thank you for listening.